folks. I'm going to start. We're missing a couple, but that's their problem, I guess. And I thank you all for coming. I guess I should apologize to those people who scheduled me last year, and unfortunately I had a small stroke which put me out of business for about 3 months, and so we had to reschedule it this year. I recognize most of you. I guess what I'm going to cover is basically my role, which I'm not going to spend much time on. What I'm going to spend time on is what I've learned over the years since. But I guess as a way of introduction, what I've learned most is that I don't care whether it's the President of the United States, whether it's the newspapers, or whether it's your own child coming home from school. You are told what whoever tells it to you wants you to hear. And that's true whether you're reading a paper or listening to the news or anything else. So mostly over the last 30, 40 years, it's been an accretion of information, which I'm going to cover here and spend most of my time on. I guess I should start out at the beginning. Why was I there? I was there because my father at the time was a captain. He was a naval engineer. He was in charge of the shipyard at Pearl Harbor. He was class of '09 from the Naval Academy and had been moved out there to oversee a major expansion of the shipyard. The employment there quadrupled in the 2 years before Pearl Harbor, and they were ramping up, getting ready for, I guess, what many people thought was inevitable. Certainly he did, because he could have left the Navy in the mid-30s and quadrupled his salary, and did not do so because he was convinced the war was coming. Now, if you give me the first slide, I'll orient the situation with that map that's on the first page of the handout that is there. There we go. There's the map. Okay, I'll go. I have to point here. Battleship Row, where the 8 battleships were. There was 7 here and 1 there. California was there. The officers' quarters were right here. That little kind of almost like a fish hook. The admiral's quarters were right here in the middle, and our house was right here. Our house was on a direct line from the airfield at Hickam. In between, there were 3 holes of the golf course here and 2 holes of the golf course in front of us. And the Japanese planes came in from the south, the torpedo planes. And they took off from the ships, the carriers, early and circled the island and came in from the south, because that's the way they had to launch their torpedoes. And the fighter planes came in later and went direct to Hickam Field or to Wheeler Field, as the case may be, Bellows and Kaneohe. Now, before the attack, there was, it was for a child, which I was, 8 to 10 years old, it was great. I mean, I could ride around that shipyard on my bicycle and go aboard the ships, which I did. You could go down to this was the oiler pier, where I went down on the tankers there and on the submarines down here. And I would go over to where the cruisers and ships under repair would dock, over here, and went on them occasionally. We could swim at the sub-base. Movies cost 5 cents. It was pretty good. And there was a Marine carry-all that carried the officers' brats into Honolulu every day. It's only a 4-mile run. And there were cane fields on both sides of the from the gate at Pearl Harbor to the Dole Pineapple factory on the edge of Honolulu. It's about a 4-mile run. It was solid cane fields. For those of you who have been out there since, it's not that way anymore, let me tell you. But in any case, it was I went to Punahou School, and it was pretty good living as I look back on it. Relative to Pearl Harbor, what led up to it, I remember 3 things quite vividly. One was that Captain Van Valkenburg, the captain of the Arizona, was the roommate at one time and classmate of my father at the Naval Academy. The result was that 3 weeks before Pearl Harbor, he invited me to spend the night on board the Arizona, which I did. And you know, for a 9, 10-year-old, this is a big deal. And seeing that Marine in uniform guarding the officers' quarters and then being taken down in the turrets and the engine room and places like that. And I watched the movies with the captain, and I slept in Admiral Kidd's cabin. Admiral Kidd was ashore, and there was a day couch there, and that's where I slept. And I went ashore Sunday morning after the services, the church services. The next weekend, and I'm not sure whether it was that weekend or the one that followed, was the Army-Navy game. And it came on at 10 o'clock in the morning. And most of the senior officers of the ships present came to our house to listen to the radio, the broadcast of the Army-Navy game. I managed to get involved because I was allowed to plot the plays one by one on the chalkboard. You know, a dash for a pass, and you know, and I frankly don't remember who won at this point, but I do remember the officers talking, don't know which ones, about how soon we would go to war. And that's the first time it was even on my horizon. Remember, I was only 10, but I remember them. And they said, well, it's going to go to the East Indies. And the question in their minds was whether or not the Philippines would be attacked, and they'd be involved immediately. I don't recall anything being said about Hawaii. And then the only other thing I'll relate to you, because my sister got very excited about it, was that invitation that's in the handouts there, which the captain of the Arizona, she still has the handwritten invitation, and there's the letter there that he wrote, first to her, inviting her and some of her friends to have dinner with him on board. In those days, they didn't allow women to stay overnight on board those ships. That was not considered proper. And that other letter from Captain Van Valkenburg to my mother indicates how much of an old school he was. He was basically saying, if you want to be a chaperone for all of this, you're most welcome. Anyway, coming the day of Pearl Harbor, I had already gotten up, and gone with my mother next door, the house next door, and she was having coffee with Grace Higgins, and I was playing with their son, which he was the only boy in that whole officer's row that was my age, because these were senior officers, and so there weren't all that many kids there.